The train slowed with a long, tired sigh as it pulled into the small western station, its iron wheels grinding gently against the tracks. Clara Whitmore sat still for a moment, her gloved hands folded tightly in her lap as if holding herself. Together, outside her window stretched a quiet town, dusty, sun-warmed, and unfamiliar. Nothing like the place she had left behind. This was it. After weeks of travel, countless miles, and more doubt than she dared admit, Clara had finally arrived. She reached for her small leather bag, worn from the journey, and stepped down from the train. The air was different here, drier, quieter, almost expectant. A warm breeze lifted a strand of her hair, and she tucked it back nervously, scanning the platform. He was supposed to be there. She had imagined this moment so many times. A man, standing with a simple smile, perhaps holding her name written on a piece of paper. Someone who had read her letters and chosen her, just as she had chosen him. A beginning, but there was no one. The platform was nearly empty, just a station worker stacking crates and an older couple walking slowly toward a wagon. Clara's eyes moved from one face to another, hope rising and falling with each glance. Maybe he was late. She waited. Minutes passed. Then more. The train behind her hissed once before beginning to move again, slowly pulling away as if taking her last. Certainty with it. Clara swallowed hard, her chest tightening. She adjusted her grip on her bag and stepped closer to the station building. "Excuse me," she said softly to the station worker. "I'm looking for someone. He was supposed to meet me here." The man looked up, wiping his hands on his trousers. "Name? Mr. Walter Green," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "He lives here. We had an arrangement." Something in the man's expression shifted, not unkind, but hesitant. He glanced briefly toward the town, then back at her. "You just got in today?" he asked. "Yes," Clara said, her heartbeat quickening. "Is he on his way?" The worker exhaled slowly. "Miss, I don't quite know how to say this." A cold feeling crept over her. "He got married last week." For a moment, Clara didn't understand the words. They seemed to float in the air between them, disconnected from meaning. "I'm sorry," the man added gently. "Big gathering. Folks have been talking about it all week." Clara blinked, her fingers tightening around the handle of her bag. "Married?" she repeated faintly. The man nodded once. Everything inside her seemed to fall silent. All the letters. All the careful hopes she had packed alongside her few belongings. The courage it had taken to leave everything behind her home, her familiar world, for a promise that now no longer existed. "I see," she said, though she did not fully. The station worker offered a sympathetic look but didn't know what else to say. After a moment, he returned to his work, leaving Clara standing there, alone in a place that suddenly felt much larger than it had moments before. She turned, slightly, looking out toward the town. Wooden buildings lined the main road, their signs creaking softly in the breeze. People moved about their day, talking, laughing, living lives that had nothing to do with her. She had come all this way for someone who hadn't even waited. A quiet ache settled in her chest, not sharp, but heavy. She had imagined disappointment. Before it had been impossible not to, but not like this. Not so complete, not so final. Clara walked slowly to a nearby bench and sat down, placing her bag beside her. For a moment, she simply stared ahead, her thoughts tangled and distant. What now? She had no family here. No plan beyond the one that had just disappeared. Returning home wasn't simple, not after everything she had invested in this journey. And staying for what? A breeze passed through the station again, lifting dust in soft spirals. Clara closed her eyes briefly, steadying herself. She wasn't weak. She reminded herself of that. She had made this journey alone. She had chosen to believe in something better. But belief, she was beginning to realize, didn't always guarantee an outcome. Still, as she sat there lost, uncertain, and quietly heartbroken, something within her refused to completely give in. Maybe this wasn't the end of her story. Maybe it was just not the beginning she expected. Clara opened her eyes again, drawing in a slow breath as the sun dipped slightly lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the platform. She didn't know it yet, but this moment, the one that felt like everything falling apart, was quietly making space for something she had never imagined. The afternoon sun stretched long across the wooden platform, casting golden light over the quiet station. Clara Whitmore still sat on the bench, her small bag resting beside her, her thoughts drifting somewhere between disbelief and quiet resolve. People came and went, though not many. A wagon rolled past in the distance. Somewhere a door creaked open and shut. Life continued around her as if nothing had changed, but for Clara, everything had. She had nowhere to go. Her fingers brushed lightly against the folded letter in her coat pocket, the last one she had received from Walter Green. She had read it so many times during her journey that the edges had softened. Back then, each word had felt like a promise. Now, it felt like something else entirely, a mistake. Clara let out a slow breath and lifted her gaze again, scanning the quiet town. Ahead. She could leave, she supposed, find another train, another place, start again somehow, but her feet didn't move. Miss? The voice was calm, low, and unfamiliar. Clara turned slightly, startled from her thoughts. Standing a few steps away was a man she hadn't noticed before. He wasn't dressed like the others who had passed through. His clothes were simple, but worn with purpose. His boots marked with dust from long days, not travel. A cowboy, she realized immediately. He stood with an easy stillness, hat in hand, as if unsure whether he was interrupting. "I didn't mean to startle you," he said. "You've been sitting here a while. Just thought I'd check if you were all right." Clara hesitated, instinctively straightening her posture. "I'm fine," she replied softly, though the words felt incomplete the moment they left her lips. The man didn't argue. He simply nodded once, studying her with a quiet kind of patience. "Train came in a while ago," he added. "Most folks don't stay behind unless they're waiting on someone or something." Clara gave a small, almost apologetic smile. "I was waiting," she said, "just not anymore." Something in her tone must have reached him, because his expression softened slightly, not with pity, but understanding. "Didn't show?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, I found out he had other plans." The cowboy glanced toward the town, as if piecing it together without needing more explanation. "That happens sometimes," he said carefully. "Not always fair, though." Clara let out a faint breath, somewhere between a sigh and a quiet laugh. "No," she admitted, "not very fair." There was a pause between them, not uncomfortable, just. "Still, I'm Ethan," he said after a moment, placing his hat back on his head. "Ethan Hayes." "Clara," she replied, "Clara Whitmore." He nodded once, committing the name to memory. "Well, Clara Whitmore," he said, his voice steady. "You planning to stay out here until the sun sets, or you got somewhere else in mind?" Clara looked down at her hands. "I haven't decided yet." That was the truth. Every plan she had brought with her had vanished the moment she stepped off that train. Ethan followed her gaze briefly, then looked back toward the quiet road leading into town. "There's not much out here at the station," he said. "Town's small, but folks are decent enough." Still, he hesitated, choosing his words. "It's not the easiest place to land without knowing someone." Clara felt that truth settle heavily in her chest. "I don't know anyone," she admitted. Ethan nodded slowly, as if he had expected that answer. For a moment, he said nothing more. He simply stood there, weighing something in his mind. Then, almost as if coming to a quiet decision, he spoke again. "I've got a place a few miles out," he said. "Nothing fancy. Just a ranch. It's quiet." Clara looked up, surprised not by the offer itself, but by how simply he said it, without expectation or pressure. "You're welcome to stay there for a bit," he continued. "Until you figure things out. No strings attached." Clara blinked, caught off guard. I couldn't impose like that." "You wouldn't be," Ethan replied calmly. "Place has more space than I use. And you look like someone who could use a roof tonight." There was no insistence in his voice, no hidden tone. Just a quiet, steady kindness that felt real. Clara hesitated. Every instinct she had told her to be careful. She had already trusted someone once, and look where that had led her. But this felt different. Ethan wasn't making promises. He wasn't offering anything beyond what he had said. Just a place. Just time. Nothing more. "You don't even know me," she said gently. Ethan gave a faint, almost thoughtful smile. "Don't have to know everything about a person to see when they need a hand." The simplicity of that answer settled something inside her. Clara glanced once more at the empty platform, at the space where her future had been supposed to begin. Then she looked back at Ethan Hayes, the stranger who had stepped forward when no one else had. Maybe this wasn't the plan she had imagined, but maybe it was something else. Something unexpected. She picked up her bag slowly, her fingers tightening around the handle. "Just for a little while," she said. Ethan nodded once, as if that was all he had expected. Just for a little while, he agreed. And as they stepped away from the station together, the sun dipping lower behind them, Clara felt something shift. Not a resolution, not yet. The road out of town stretched wide and quiet, lined with open land that seemed to roll endlessly beneath the soft glow of the setting sun. Clara sat beside Ethan Hayes in his wagon, her small bag resting at her feet, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Neither of them spoke much at first. The rhythm of the horse's steady steps filled the silence, along with the gentle creak of the wooden wheels. It wasn't uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. Clara found herself stealing small glances at Ethan, trying to understand the man she had chosen, perhaps impulsively, to trust. He didn't seem like someone who talked without reason. His attention stayed mostly on the road ahead, his posture relaxed but alert, as though he had spent years moving through this land and understood every turn of it. "You've been here long?" Clara asked finally, her voice soft against the quiet. Ethan nodded slightly. "A while." Clara smiled faintly at the brief answer. "That sounds like a story you're not ready to tell." A hint of amusement touched his expression. "Something like that." She didn't press further. Instead, she let her gaze drift outward, taking in the vastness around them. The sky had begun to change colors, soft gold fading into pink, then deepening toward evening blue. It was beautiful in a way she hadn't expected. Vast, yes, but not empty. "Is it always this quiet?" she asked. "Most days," Ethan replied. "Some folks don't like it." Clara considered that. "I think I might." Ethan glanced at her briefly, as if surprised by the answer, but said nothing. After some time, the outline of a ranch came into view, a modest house, a barn off to the side, and a wide stretch of land that seemed to belong to no one and everyone at once. It wasn't grand, but it felt steady. "This is it," Ethan said simply, guiding the wagon to a stop. Clara stepped down carefully, brushing her dress lightly as she looked around. The air felt different here, cleaner somehow, carrying the faint scent of hay and earth. Soft breeze moved through the open space, lifting the edges of her hair again. "It's peaceful," she said. Ethan nodded. "That it is." He led her toward the house, opening the door with an easy familiarity. Inside, the space was simple but well kept. A wooden table near the window, a small stove, a few shelves with neatly arranged items. Nothing unnecessary, but nothing neglected. Clara stepped inside slowly, taking it in. "You can stay here," Ethan said, setting aside his hat. "There's a spare room down the hall." She turned toward him, still slightly uncertain. "I don't want to cause trouble." "You're not," he replied. "Just think of it as borrowing some time." The way he said it, calm, unassuming, made it easier to accept. Clara nodded gently. "Thank you." Ethan gave a small nod in return, then moved toward the stove. "You must be hungry. Travel like that doesn't leave much room for proper meals." Clara smiled faintly. "I won't argue with that." They worked side by side in quiet cooperation, Ethan preparing something simple, Clara offering help where she could. It felt strangely natural, despite everything that had brought her here. As the evening settled around them, the house began to feel warmer, not just from the stove, but from the presence of another person. "You don't ask many questions," Clara observed after a while. Ethan glanced at her. "Figure people tell you what matters when they're ready. And if they're not, then it probably matters even more." Clara looked down at her hands, thoughtful. "That's kind of you," she said. Ethan shook his head lightly. "Just practical." They shared a quiet meal at the small table, the soft glow of a lantern casting gentle light across the room. Outside, the sky had darkened completely, scattered with stars that seemed brighter than any Clara had seen before. For the first time since arriving, the tightness in her chest began to ease. After dinner, Ethan showed her the spare room. It was simple: a bed, a small dresser, a window that looked out over the open land. Nothing extravagant, but more than enough. "I'll be up early," he said. "You don't have to be," Clara nodded. "I'm used to early mornings." Ethan paused briefly at the doorway. "Well, you can decide that tomorrow." There was a quiet understanding in his words, no expectations, no demands. Just choice. "Good night, Clara," he said. "Good night, Ethan." As he stepped away, Clara sat gently on the edge of the bed, her gaze drifting toward the window. The stars stretched endlessly across the sky, steady and distant. This wasn't where she had planned to be, not even close. But as she lay down, pulling the blanket lightly around her, she realized something unexpected for the first time since stepping off that train. She didn't feel completely lost, and somewhere in the quiet stillness of that unfamiliar place, Clara began to understand sometimes the path you never planned is the one that leads you exactly where you need to be. Morning came softly over the ranch, not with noise, but with light. Clara woke to the gentle glow of sunrise slipping through the window, painting the small room in shades of gold and pale amber. For a moment, she lay still, listening. There were no city sounds, no crowded streets, just the distant rustle of wind across open land and the faint, steady rhythm of life beginning outside. It felt calm. She sat up slowly, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face, and took in her surroundings again. The room was still unfamiliar, but no longer unsettling. It carried a quiet sense of belonging she hadn't expected to feel so soon. After dressing, Clara stepped into the main room. Ethan was already there, moving with quiet efficiency near the stove. He glanced up briefly as she entered. "You're up early," he said. Clara smiled lightly. "I told you I would be." He gave a small nod, as if acknowledging a fact already proven. "Coffee's there," he added, gesturing toward the table. "Thank you." She poured herself a cup, wrapping her hands around the warmth. For a moment, they shared the space in comfortable silence, the kind that didn't need filling. "What do you usually do in the mornings?" Clara asked. Ethan set aside what he was working on. "Check the horses, walk the fence line, make sure everything's where it should be." Clara tilted her head slightly. "May I come along?" Ethan paused, not in refusal, but in consideration. It's not exactly easy work. I didn't come all this way to sit still, she replied gently. Something in her tone made him nod. All right, just stay close. Outside, the morning air was crisp but welcoming. The land stretched endlessly, touched by early sunlight that made everything feel alive. Clara followed Ethan as he moved toward the stables, her steps careful but determined. The horses greeted them with soft sounds, shifting slightly as Ethan approached. He moved among them with quiet familiarity, checking, adjusting. Observing Clara watched closely. You've done this a long time, she said. Long enough, he replied. He showed her small things, how to approach without startling them, how to move calmly, how to notice what needed attention. Clara listened, absorbing every detail, her curiosity steady and sincere. You learn fast, Ethan remarked after a while. Clara smiled. I had to growing up. He glanced at her briefly. Big family? She shook her head. No, just responsibilities. Ethan didn't ask more, but something in his expression suggested he understood more than she had said. As the morning passed, Clara found herself adjusting to the rhythm of the ranch. It wasn't easy work, but it was honest and strangely grounding. Each task had a purpose. Each moment felt real. Back at the house, she began helping in her own way, tidying, organizing, bringing a sense of warmth to the simple space. She didn't change much, just small touches. A folded cloth here, a rearranged shelf there. When Ethan returned inside later, he paused slightly. Something felt different, not unfamiliar, just softer. You didn't have to do all this, he said. Clara looked up from the table, a faint smile on her face. I wanted to. He nodded once, though his gaze lingered for a moment longer than before. Days began to take shape like this, quiet, steady, shared without being spoken. Clara learned the patterns of the land. Ethan grew accustomed to her presence in ways he hadn't expected. Their conversations deepened slowly, not all at once, but piece by piece. What made you come here? Ethan asked one evening. As they sat outside watching the sun lower across the horizon. Clara hesitated, then answered honestly. I thought I was choosing a future. Ethan nodded, his gaze fixed on the distance. And now? She looked out. Across the land, thoughtful. Now I think, maybe I was just choosing a direction. Ethan considered that, then said quietly, sometimes that's all you need. There was a quiet understanding between them, unspoken, but present. They were both people who had carried things alone for a long time, and somehow, without trying, they were beginning to share the weight of it. That night, as Clara stood by the window once more, looking out at the endless sky, she realized something had shifted again. This place no longer felt temporary, and Ethan Hayes no longer felt like a stranger. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something just as important, a connection built not on promises or plans, but on trust, patience, and the quiet discovery of two lives slowly finding their way into the same story. The first time Clara noticed the change, it was subtle, a pause in conversation as she stepped into the general store. A glance held just a second too long. A smile that didn't quite reach the eyes. It wasn't unkind, but it wasn't nothing either. She stood near the counter, carefully selecting a few small items Ethan had mentioned, kneading flour, thread, and a bar of soap. The store itself was warm and neatly arranged, filled with the quiet hum of everyday life. Two women stood near the far shelf, speaking in hushed tones that softened even further when Clara moved closer. That's her, one of them murmured. Not quite quietly enough. Clara pretended not to hear. She had known, of course, that a small town would notice someone new. That much was expected. But this felt different, curiosity mixed with something she couldn't quite name. Morning, the shopkeeper said kindly as she approached the counter. "Good morning," Clara replied, offering a polite smile. "You're staying out at Hayes' place, aren't you?" Clara hesitated for the briefest moment, then nodded. "Yes, just for a little while." The shopkeeper nodded slowly, not unkindly. "He's a good man. Keeps to himself mostly." "I've noticed," Clara said softly as she gathered her things and stepped back outside. The sunlight felt warmer, but the air carried something new with it, awareness. Eyes that followed, even if only for a moment. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Clara sat with her thoughts, watching the town fade behind her. She wasn't upset, not exactly, but something inside her had shifted. A realization people were noticing, and in a place like this, noticing often led to assumptions. When she arrived back at the ranch, Ethan was near the fence line, repairing a loose board. He glanced up as she approached, setting his tools aside. "You were gone a while," he said. "Stopped in town," Clara replied, stepping down. "Picked up a few things." Ethan nodded, brushing his hands off. "Everything all right?" Clara paused, then gave a small, honest answer. "They talk." Ethan's expression didn't change much, but something in his eyes sharpened slightly. "They always do. It doesn't bother you?" she asked. He shrugged lightly. "I don't give it much reason to." Clara looked down briefly, then back at him. "I might be." There was no accusation in her voice, just quiet concern. Ethan studied her for a moment, then said, "You're here because I asked you to stay. That's reason enough." His words were simple, steady, but they didn't erase what she had felt. "In town. I don't want to make things harder for you," Clara added. Ethan shook his head. "You're not." A small silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, but thoughtful. Still, something lingered over the next few days. Clara became more aware of it. The way conversation shifted when she entered a space. The careful politeness. The quiet curiosity that followed her presence. She handled it with grace, just as she handled everything else, calm, respectful, composed. But inside, questions began to form. Where did she belong here? Was she just passing through? Or something else entirely? One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in soft shades of amber and rose, Clara sat on the porch steps, her hands resting lightly in her lap. Ethan stood nearby, finishing the last of the day's work. "You don't say much when something's on your mind," he said without looking at her. Clara smiled faintly. "I didn't realize it was that obvious." "It is," he replied. She hesitated, then spoke carefully. "This place, it has a rhythm, a way things are understood, and I don't quite fit into it." Ethan set his tools aside and turned toward her fully now. "You don't have to fit into anything." "Everyone does," Clara said gently, "whether they mean to or not." Ethan considered that, then walked a few steps closer, leaning lightly against the porch railing. "I've lived here a long time," he said. "Long enough to know that people will always find something to talk about. Today it's you. Tomorrow it'll be something else." Clara looked up at him. "And what about you? What about me?" She held his gaze, her voice soft but steady. "Where do I fit in your world?" The question lingered between them. Ethan didn't answer right away, not because he didn't have one, but because he hadn't yet put it into words. Finally, he said quietly, "You're here." It wasn't a grand statement. It wasn't a promise, but it was real. Clara looked away slightly. Her heart caught somewhere between comfort and uncertainty. Being here wasn't the same as belonging, but it wasn't nothing either. As night settled over the ranch, the stars beginning to scatter across the sky, Clara remained on the porch a little longer than usual. The whispers in town hadn't broken anything, but they had reminded her of something important, that staying here, in this quiet place beside a man who asked for nothing and offered everything in silence, might not be as simple as it once seemed, and for the first time since she arrived, Clara began to wonder not whether she should leave, but whether she could. The decision didn't come all at once. It arrived quietly like a thought Clara couldn't quite push away no matter how much she tried to focus on the steady rhythm of the days. At first, she ignored it. She continued helping around the ranch, waking early, moving through each task with the same quiet care. She spoke with Ethan as she always had, calm, thoughtful, unhurried. And on the surface, nothing had changed. But beneath that calm, something had shifted. The whispers in town had faded, as Ethan said they would. Life had moved on. Yet the feeling they stirred in her remained, not because of what others thought, but because of what she had begun to realize herself. She was no longer just passing through, and that made everything more complicated. One evening, Clara stood by the small window in her room, watching the sky deepen into soft shades of blue and silver. The land stretched endlessly beyond, peaceful, and still. It had become familiar to her now, comforting, even too comforting. Her hand rested lightly against the wooden frame as her thoughts turned inward. This wasn't her home, not truly. Ethan had never said it was. He had never asked her to stay, never made promises or expectations. Everything he had given her, space, kindness, time, had been offered freely. And that was exactly what made it so difficult. Clara closed her eyes briefly. If she stayed much longer, she might begin to want something more, not just a place, but a reason. And Ethan, he wasn't a man who spoke easily of such things. His world was built on quiet actions, not words. She couldn't ask him for something he hadn't offered. It wouldn't be fair to him or to herself. That night, after the house had gone still, Clara sat at the small table with a piece of paper in front of her. The lantern cast a soft glow across the surface as she held the pen carefully, searching for the right words. She had written many letters before, but this one felt different, slower, more deliberate. She began simply. Ethan, the ink flowed steadily, though her heart felt anything but. Thank you for your kindness, for giving me a place when I had none, and for asking nothing in return. I will always be grateful for that. She paused, her gaze lingering on the words before continuing. But I think it's time for me to find my own way again. I came here believing in one future, and found something entirely different. Something I didn't expect. Her hand stilled for a moment. Something I didn't plan for. Clara exhaled softly and set the pen down, her fingers resting lightly against the table. She didn't need to write everything she felt. Some things were better left understood without being said. Carefully, she folded the letter and placed it where he would find it in the morning. Then she stood, moving quietly through the house. She gathered her few belongings, placing them gently into her bag. Each movement felt heavier than it should have, as if the space itself was asking her to stay. But she couldn't, not like this. Stepping outside, the cool night air met her softly. The stars stretched endlessly above, just as they had every night since she arrived. Only now, they felt different, less like a promise, and more like a quiet farewell. Clara walked slowly toward the edge of the property, her steps careful against the earth. She stopped once, turning back. The house stood in the distance, warm light still faintly visible through the window. It looked exactly as it had when she first arrived, simple, steady, unchanged. But she wasn't the same. A small, bittersweet smile touched her lips. She had come here thinking her story had ended before it could begin. Instead, she had found something real, something quiet, something that mattered. And maybe that was enough. Clara adjusted her grip on her bag and turned forward again, her path leading into the unknown once more. There was fear in that, but also strength, because This time, she wasn't leaving out of loss. She was leaving because she understood her own heart and what it needed. As she walked beneath the vast open sky, the ranch slowly fading behind her, one thought remained steady in her mind. Some places aren't meant to be where you stay forever, even if they feel like home. And sometimes, the hardest choice isn't walking away, it's doing so before your heart forgets how. Ethan noticed something was wrong the moment he woke. It wasn't loud or obvious, just a feeling. A stillness in the house that didn't belong. The kind that settles when something important is missing. He sat up slowly, listening. No quiet movement from the other room. No soft clink of dishes. No sign of Clara. That alone wasn't unusual. She woke early sometimes, but this felt different. Ethan stood, pulling on his boots quickly as he stepped into the main room. His gaze moved across the space, sharp and searching. That's when he saw it. A folded piece of paper on the table. He stopped. For a moment, he didn't reach for it. He just stood there, already knowing. Then, slowly, he picked it up. Ethan. Her handwriting was steady. Careful. As his eyes moved across the words, the quiet in the room deepened. Thank you for your kindness. Each line felt heavier than the last. Not because of what she said, but because of what she didn't. She was leaving, not out of anger, not out of disappointment, but because she believed she should. Ethan lowered the letter slightly, his jaw tightening. You should have said something, he muttered under his breath, though he knew she had in the only way she thought she could. Looked toward the door, the early morning light already stretching across the land beyond it. How long had she been gone? Not long. He knew that instinctively. Clara wasn't the kind of person to disappear without a trace. She would have left quietly, yes, but not in a rush. Not without thought. Ethan folded the letter once more and set it down firmly. Then he moved. Outside. The air was cool and sharp, carrying the first light of day across the wide open land. Ethan didn't hesitate. He saddled his horse with practiced speed, his movement steady but urgent. You're not just going to walk away, he said under his breath, more to himself than anyone else. Within moments, he was riding. The path leading away from the ranch was clear enough. He knew the direction she would take, toward the road, toward the station, toward whatever came next. But something in him refused to let that be the end. The land stretched wide before him, the rhythm of hooves breaking the morning quiet as he rode faster. His mind wasn't filled with doubt, it was filled with clarity. He hadn't said anything, not when he should have, not when she needed to hear it, and now she was leaving. Because of that silence, Ethan tightened his grip slightly. Not this time. Up. Ahead, a small figure came into view. Walking. Steady. Determined. Clara. He slowed slightly as he approached, not wanting to startle her. The sound of the horse reached her first. She stopped, turning slowly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The early sunlight caught in her hair, her bag resting at her side, her expression calm but not unfeeling. You found my note, she said softly. Ethan nodded once as he stepped down from the horse. You left early, he replied. Clara gave a faint, almost apologetic smile. It seemed easier that way. Ethan shook his head slightly. Easier doesn't mean right. A quiet silence settled between them. Clara looked down briefly, then back at him. I didn't want to make things harder. For you? You didn't, he said firmly. But I would have, she added gently. If I stayed? Ethan took a step closer, his gaze steady. You don't get to decide that on your own. Her breath caught slightly at that, not because of the words, but because of how he said them. Not harsh, just certain. I wasn't asking for anything, she said. I just needed to leave before I did. Ethan studied her, then spoke more openly than he ever had before. I know I don't say much, he admitted, Never been good with words. Clara said nothing, but her eyes didn't leave his. But this, he continued, gesturing lightly. Between them, this isn't nothing. Her expression softened, just slightly. I didn't think it was, she said. Then why leave? He asked. Clara hesitated, her voice quieter now. Because I didn't know if it was something I could stay for. That was the truth of it. Ethan let that settle, then shook his head once, not in disagreement, but in realization. I should have said something sooner, he said. Clara didn't argue. Instead, she waited. And for the first time, Ethan didn't hold back. You didn't come too late, he said, his voice steady but filled with something deeper now. You just came at the wrong time, for the wrong man. Clara's breath stilled. Ethan took another step closer. But for me? He added quietly, his eyes meeting hers fully. You're right on time. The words hung in the air between them, simple, honest, undeniable. Clara felt something shift inside her. Something she had been holding back finally given space to exist. You don't have to stay, Ethan continued. I'm not asking you to. But if you're leaving because you think there's nothing here for you. He paused, then finished softly. You're wrong. Clara looked at him, her heart caught between everything she had been trying to protect and everything she felt. You're not a burden, he said. You never were. A long silence followed. Not empty. Full. Clara glanced down the road ahead, the path she had chosen. Then back at Ethan, the one she hadn't expected. Her grip on the bag loosened slightly. Nothing about this was part of the plan, she said. Ethan gave a faint, almost knowing smile. Seems like the best things rarely are. For a moment longer, Clara stood there, caught between leaving and staying. Then, slowly, she let the weight of the decision shift, not away from fear, but towards something else. Something real. And for the first time since she had started walking away, Clara didn't take another step forward. Instead, she stayed where she was. For a long moment, the world felt still. Clara stood on the quiet road, her bag hanging loosely at her side, her heart caught somewhere between what she had planned and what she hadn't dared to hope for. Ethan didn't move closer. He didn't rush her, didn't reach for her, didn't try to pull her back. He simply stood there steady, patient, giving her something no one else had since she arrived. Choice. Clara looked down the road ahead once more. It stretched far into the distance, open and uncertain. A path she had already begun to take. When she understood. Alone. Then she turned back. Ethan was still there, waiting, not with expectation, but with quiet certainty. And somehow, that made all the difference. You didn't say any of this before, Clara said softly. Ethan nodded. I know. Why now? He took a slow breath, his gaze never leaving hers. Because now I know what it looks like if I don't. The honesty in that answer settled deep within her. Clara studied him for a moment, the man who spoke little, but meant every word he said. The man who had asked nothing from her, yet given her more than she had expected to find. You're not making promises, she said. No, Ethan replied simply. You're not asking me to stay. No. Clara's lips curved faintly, her eyes softening. You're making this very difficult. Ethan let out a quiet breath, almost a smile. Wasn't trying to make it easy? A gentle silence followed, but it wasn't heavy anymore. Clara looked down at her bag, then slowly lowered it to the ground. The small thud against the earth felt louder than it should have, as if it marked something shifting into place. I don't want to stay because I have nowhere else to go, she said carefully. Ethan nodded once. I understand. I want to stay because... She paused, searching for the right words, not perfect ones, just honest ones. Because I feel something here, something I didn't expect. Ethan didn't interrupt. He let her speak. And I don't know what it becomes, she continued, or where it leads. but I know I don't want to walk away from it, not without giving it a chance." Ethan stepped closer, then not far, just enough to close the distance between them slightly. "That's all I'd ask," he said. Clara met his gaze again, her voice soft but certain. "Then I'm not leaving." The words settled into the morning air, simple and steady, not dramatic, not rushed, just real. Ethan nodded once, a quiet relief passing through his expression, not overwhelming, just enough to show that it mattered. "All right," he said. Clara smiled, a small, genuine smile that reached her eyes in a way it hadn't before. "All right," she echoed. They walked back together, this time not as strangers helping each other through circumstance, but as two people choosing the same direction. The ranch came into view again, just as it had before, unchanged, quiet, steady. But everything felt different. Inside, the house welcomed them with the same soft stillness, the same warmth. Clara set her bag down near the table, glancing around as if seeing it anew, not as a temporary place, but as something with possibility. Ethan moved toward the window, resting his hand lightly against the frame. "You'll still have your own space," he said. "Nothing has to change all at once." Clara nodded. "I'd like that. Because this, whatever it was, didn't need to be rushed. It wasn't built on urgency or expectation. It was built on something quieter, something stronger." Days passed. Then weeks. Life continued, but not as it had before. There was more laughter, now soft at first, then easier. More conversation. More shared moments that didn't feel accidental anymore. Clara's presence became part of the rhythm of the ranch, not as a guest, but as something closer to home. And Ethan changed too, not in who he was, but in how much of himself he allowed to be seen. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in familiar shades of gold and amber, they stood side by side on the porch. "You ever think about how close it was?" Clara asked softly. "To what?" Ethan replied. "To me leaving," she said. Ethan glanced at her, then out at the horizon. "I try not to," Clara smiled faintly. "I do." He raised an eyebrow slightly. "Why's that?" She looked at him, her voice gentle. "Because it reminds me that I stayed for the right reason." Ethan held her gaze for a moment, then nodded slowly.